Hello, everybody, and welcome to Rocket Lasso Live, Season 1, Episode 18. And today is a very special day for two big reasons. First of all, I've got my first guest on the show, which is super exciting.
Exciting to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Chris.
I've been bugging you for a long time. So this, of course, is Rick Barrett from Maxon. And there's a bunch of reorganization at Maxon like a year ago. So what's your new official title there?
Yeah, well, when David McGavran came in as CEO last July, he reorganized. We had been organized very geographically. So Maxon US operated fairly independently from Maxon Germany and Maxon UK. And we shuffled everything up so that we were all working functionally. So I've shifted over and I'm working primarily in the product management department. And so working on figuring out the best features to add to Cinema 4D and organizing things and helping to coordinate with marketing on how we communicate those things to users.
Yeah, and so that just means that even more so than ever, well, you've always been great at kind of having your fingers more on the pulse of where you think the user base is with Cinema 4D. And you and I have always been pretty in sync with how things go, so I'm extra excited to have you on the show for that reason.
Yeah, and now it's even more my job description than ever. So
yeah,
it's
well,
exciting.
you have a main line now into like trying to influence where things might go.
Yes,
based on the way users talking, studios want to use things and everything. So that is great. And Rick used to do the old like weekly C4D live show for years, way before Rocket Lasso, way before Grayscale Gorilla was live streaming.
This is kind of nostalgic for me. The idea of checking the chat and making sure that we're on screen when we're supposed to be on screen. I mean, the technology's come a long way, but yeah, it was fun when I used to have time to do that.
We're just missing the like your can of Coke or something.
Yeah, I've got an iced tea here, thanks to Chris, but no Diet Coke today.
So let's see. Well, let's. Well, I guess I should be checking the chat. So if you want to do a quick overview of some R21, especially the new pricing and subscription and everything, just kind of tell everybody the way it breaks down. I'll check the chat, see if there's any questions. And
right, sure. So I'm sure that most of your viewers watched Dave's keynote yesterday and have seen the news online, but we've got some exciting news as far as how we're delivering the software, as well as the new release itself. As far as the new release, there's some great new features like the Caps and Bevels, the Miximo Control Rig, the field forces are super cool. Woo! Vector volumes, and lots of like usability improvements throughout the interface, and we're going to dig into all that stuff today. Of course, the big news is the new subscription pricing option.
Huge thing. People have been speculating on that coming for like 5 years now. Essentially, ever since Adobe did it, it's like, when is Maxon going to do it? When is Maxon going to do it? Some people worried that it would happen. Other people excited or being like, why isn't it happening yet?
Yeah, and I think the speculation was there because it's just the way most of the industry is going. And there's a real need to... There was a real need to actually fix the problem of getting people into 3D in general and into Cinema 4D specifically. I mean... It's hard to take somebody who just got out of college and tell them, now pay $4,000 and start your career. Yeah. So this provides people an opportunity to get going in 3D, whether they're coming out of college or whether they're an existing 2D designer and ready to take the next step into 3D, or as we call it, 4D.
What's the 4D?
The fourth dimension is time.
Yep.
And because we do animation, we focus on the fourth dimension. But yeah, we're super excited about this new subscription plan, and still offering perpetual, of course, and want to make sure that our users have the best options possible, but really excited to be able to get more people into the Cinema 4D community, which is the most amazing community in the world, in large part thanks to people like you, who share tips and techniques freely every week, multiple times a week, and so I'm excited to see that community just grow by leaps and bounds over the next year.
Oh, the threshold for entry is lower now. It's really exciting because I think as more and more time goes on, more people will be on subscription. If you're on subscription, that automatically means you have the newest version. So it means everybody's going to be having whatever is new.
Right.
That's cool. The different flavors of cinema are gone, so there's no more broadcast, or I don't remember, was there just like one called Prime?
Yeah, there was Prime, Broadcast, Visualize, Studio, Body Paint, and we've done away with all that. It simplifies things for us a lot because we don't have to figure out what goes where and who's going to have access to what. Makes the development process a whole lot simpler. And ultimately it just makes the purchase process a whole lot simpler. Because I know that other regions have been different, but here in the States, when you asked anybody what they should buy, they just always said just buy Studio because you're going to need it all anyway. So rather than continuing to make people have to ask that question and make that choice, we've gotten rid of all those additions, and everybody's just going to have all the great features in Cinema 4D.
Exactly, and it's going to help with plugin development on my end, where I just know everybody has it. Like, there's certain tools where it's like, the broadcast version has to have certain things, and this other, Studio can have a different feature. So that just simplifies everything across the board. So that is really great. The let's see. So I think we are probably ready to jump into cinema and just start tinking around. So let's see. Yeah, I'm going to jump onto the screen, and what do we want to open with actually here? Let's go ahead.
Well, why don't we open with the cool mirrored effect?
Yes.
Why don't we open with what you see when Cinema 4D opens? And this is probably, quick start dialogues are something that a lot of people love to hate, honestly, but we've put a lot of thought into creating a dialogue that would be a great entry place, not just for new users, but for existing users as well. And so the actual, the left side stays consistent. We have buttons to start a new project or open projects. If you had any recent files, those would show up there on the left side. And we're going to have some quick start templates as well for specific use cases.
Are those templates the interface, or does it populate the scene? I haven't actually.
It populates the scene. Actually, right now they're all placeholders, so don't click.
Don't click.
And in fact, those options I think are probably going to change as we get into production. The things have been so crazy that we haven't gotten quite to the point with all the templates that we want them to be. So some of them are going to be a little bit, there's only going to be a couple when we actually ship. And that's an area, honestly, where I'd love to hear feedback from users of what types of templates they'd like to see and what types of things they always add to the scene for specific types of projects. Because we could actually feed those in and create templates that are really good starting points for users.
So it's the kind of thing where you could do like a dynamic MoGraph scene where it's a cloner with a bunch of boxes, a floor, and they're ready to open it up, hit play, and they'll all fit the ground. That type of idea.
Right. So the one that's going to be in there for sure is a product visualization. And it's going to have, for instance, a lighting rig that we know works pretty well. It's going to have a black reflective floor, a white reflective floor. It's going to have a turntable rig so that you can easily rotate the object around and create an animation for that. So things like that. The idea is to be as generic as possible, but to sort of tune the starting project based on what type of scene you're creating.
Sure. Well, a single setting changing, like I always leave everything defaults because I'm making tutorials, so defaults are just better for everybody because I don't have to explain to everybody. It's like the shortcut is this, but I'm doing this. But tweaking, if you make a cloner and it's set to grid and you have like X, Y, and Z, but a flat grid is better. Like those saved clicks add up so quickly. So
and actually, I should, just because you mentioned that, we'll get back to the quick start dialogue, but one of the things we've done with R21 is really gone through again, and we did it a little bit with R20, but another concerted effort with R21 of looking at the defaults that we should have in the application and tuning those defaults based on how people actually use the objects.
Yeah, just a handful of those, and I've just been stumbling across it. And there's a lot of changes in the interface, but I found it to be very intuitive. Very, very infrequently have I tried to reach for something and it's like, it's not in the regular place, and I can't find it. It's always like, it's not there, but I bet it's here, and it is. Right. So that's been great. But even little things like when you make a random field, it's defaulting not to random, but the noise preset. And it's like that one little click there, it's like, it fundamentally behaves differently, and people
because everybody just wants to use C4D's amazing noises anyway, right?
Noises all the time. So one last thing on this is we've got a list of tutorials here from Cineversity and
right.
So it's just going to be curated content that Maxon's going to be putting out?
Right. So the bottom of this is always going to show the most recent Cineversity tutorials. So you can always, whether you're a new user or an existing user, you can always see the new content that's coming out from Cineversity. And then that top pane in the middle, for new users, for trial users, that's going to show some initially three tutorials that we've created that are, and these are just examples, but we've created 3 tutorials that are very targeted content that in 10 minutes will help you get to a success point, basically. So we're really excited about those because we expect a whole bunch of new people will be downloading and trying the trial because Cinema 4D is more accessible than ever. The right side, if you're using a trial version, is going to encourage you to buy because, obviously that's what we want to do. But if you're using a commercial version, those top two panes change. And the right side's actually going to show you the latest news from Maxon. We know that users are busy and it's hard to often keep abreast of the changes that Maxon makes or the news that Maxon posts. And so this will give you an opportunity every time you launch Cinema 4D to see what the latest news is that we've been talking about. And then the middle pane I'm really excited about. You can't see it again here because it's the trial version. But for commercial users, what we're going to do is highlight one user's artwork every week. So it's kind of going to be like a living splash screen. And it says right there, it's going to say right there in there, use hashtag C4D to get featured. So people who post on Instagram, people who post on Twitter, we're going to find some of the best artwork that's posted, and we're going to feature those on a weekly basis. So you'll get to see that constantly change. You'll get to be inspired by it. And you'll also have the opportunity to get featured yourself.
Excellent. And Maxon's really good at sniffing out like new talent and finding people, so that's exciting.
Yeah, and it's a good time to mention the great new talent that we have presenting at the show. We're sorry you didn't make it in, but we figured that people get to see you twice a week, so or more.
Yeah, so, I'm cutting in as it is. So.
Yeah, so but definitely check out all the great presenters at c4dlive.com. It's a more diverse cast of presenters than ever before. And we're showing a lot of great things from character animation to motion graphics, FUI stuff, Redshift. Really excited about the presentations that are going on at the booth.
Yeah, everyone that I caught is like, wow, this is cool. Like, there's all this focus on character animation from some of the new people, and modeling, and really getting in deep.
Sure.
Would you like to start by talking about some of the new text stuff?
Sure, I'd love to. This was one of my specific labors of love. It's something I've wanted to see in Cinema 4D for a long time. And it's better caps and bevels. Most of you, I'm sure, know, if you're existing users, if you've been around Cinema 4D for a while, that it was really hard to properly get text to add bevels and rounding to text without ruining the shape. In the old Cinema 4D, you would always bevel outside, and you'd end up completely losing the artistic design of the font or of the logo. So now we don't need to bevel outside, we can bevel inside. And we worked really hard on this to create a nice algorithm that finds it's called a straight skeleton algorithm, but it basically finds the innermost peak of the path. And somebody on beta actually pointed out that this is really good even if you have like a spline shape of a roof. And you can use this because it's actually the same algorithm they use to find the peak of a roof. But what we're mostly concerned with is the ability to really easily adjust the bevel shape, and we've provided more flexibility than ever before on that. First thing, something that users have been really excited about as I've shown them this is something that I never really, you get so used to just, okay, fill it cap, and changing it here, changing it there. It never really occurred to me that how much of a workflow drag that was, having to set the bevel on both the front and the end. But as we went and did some user visits, some people mentioned this, and I was like, yeah, of course. So by default now, when you control the bevel, it's going to affect both the front and the back of the object. If you want to control the front and the back separately, there's a checkbox here. You just turn it on, and we double the options so that you can control them separately. Within the bevel shape here itself, right now it's in round mode, so it's just sort of a simple rounded or chiseled bevel. And you can adjust the number of segments, the depth of the shape, so you can go internal or external. We had this extended shape option so that you can control how far out what the extrusion portion of the bevel is. But where I think it gets really interesting and exciting is when we jump into something like curve mode. So here we actually can set up whatever profile we'd like for the bevel. So you can create some really nice and intricate bevels with this option. We also, of course, have step mode, and
that's my favorite.
Yes, in the past you only had like a simple engrave, a 1-step, a 2-step, but now you can just increase the segments and have as many steps as you want. One of the things that's really cool with all of these is that the selection sets, we've always had the cap and rounding selection sets, but they were kind of you had to remember what the little C1, R1 stuff was, and now we're exposing those right here, making it easy to see what they are. You can even just click the button so that they actually show up in the object manager.
I noticed that there's a new little icon here, I think implying that those are kind of locked away, like, hey, these aren't
they're proxies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, proxy.
And you'll see the same functionality. This is functionality that actually we first developed on the Bernoulli fracture object. So you'll see the same thing with the Bernoulli fracture, being able to turn on the specific polygon and edge selections there. We also added the new shell selection, so you can easily texture just the extruded portion. And then we've added edge selections for the start of the shell, the end of the shell, the caps, and the steps. So you can add additional beveling. You can do things with the edges themselves. Maybe sweep things along edges. There's lots of different possibilities here.
Oh yeah, I haven't even really tinkered with the edge selection, but that does open up some pretty significant possibilities.
Another thing is this creates a really nice geometry, polygonal flow, and we've got options here. In addition to the quadrangles options and the triangles option that we've had before, we've added Delaunay, I don't know if that's pronounced right.
Oh, okay. I was saying
Delaunay.
Delani? I was saying Delani. I looked up a video, and it was about a restaurant called Delani, and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna go with that.
Okay. Some poor guy whose name who figured out this algorithm is crying right now because we're mispronouncing his name. But the idea here is to actually be able to create a good mesh for actually deforming your object, and so that's there, as well as the old regular caps option in the quadrangles. Now, of course, with all of this, there's a lot of options now, and it helps a lot to be able to save and load presets. So we've created this load and save preset option, so you can easily jump to a single step. Turn off the lines so it's a little easier to see what's happening. And you can see that that's actually defining a spline profile that gives us a really nice single step bevel.
It's really cool that presets are kind of were like a bread and butter thing was at Grayscale Gorilla, like building presets so people can quickly get to it. And the idea with a preset isn't to take the preset and just use it. It's that you quickly got into something that's close to what you want, and now you tweak it to become exactly what you want. And the idea of doing that, or if you have something very common you're using, to save your own preset and have that in that same collection, like that becomes really huge.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so this new engine works with not just the MoText and the extrude object, but obviously if you're using a lathe or a loft or a sweep as well, anytime where you would define the caps, you had the option to use all these new features.
Exactly, like this works on the sweep, it works on the extrude, probably on the loft. I haven't tinkered with that one. A couple questions, specifically Tobias is talking about text and how like text doesn't get used too often in cinema. That might be true for like a lot of the daily render crowd, but like when I do tech supports, like, and I get sent an example file, there's always text. Everything is logos, and text is where Cinema 4D is being used very often every day in studios. It's all text. So I think this is actually
Cinema
huge.
4D's bread and butter is broadcast graphics. I mean, virtually every TV channel everywhere uses Cinema 4D to create text.
Exactly. So, and it's not just the MoText. You can take the text, the spline object, feed that through an extrude, and you have all the same options.
So. Right, and not just text, but logos too. I mean, I created the CV Art Smart plugin, which allows you to really easily bring in Illustrator files. And I'll need to update it now because we've got all these great new bevel options that I need to build in. But I've seen from the popularity of that, the number of people who need to pull in logos and create 3D animated versions of logos.
Yeah.
And the combination of ArtSmart, Cinema 4D's native functionality, MoGraph, and now this new Caps and Bevel functionality makes that a really pleasant and fast experience, I think.
A couple other questions popped in. Somebody's asking any idea, I don't think right now, but in the future, would there be any ideas of doing like a Cinema 4D indie license or like a hobbyist license type of thing?
I think that we've just put out this new subscription pricing. I'm going to roll with that for a minute and see how it goes.
Yeah, and then let's see. Does this work for bevel modifier 2? I don't think this seems very similar to the bevel modifier.
It's a lot of the same techniques, and it's actually not completely the straight skeleton and the same interface is not completely built into the bevel yet. But obviously we've created some new libraries here that we can make use of in other places in Cinema 4D.
And I'm seeing everybody's questions come in here, which is great. I'm trying to focus on the questions that are pertinent to what we're working on right now directly. But for someone else's question about Redshift and the new nodes, just really, really quickly, I think that there's now node spaces where the people who are developing Redshift can go and start using the new node system eventually.
And not just Redshift, but any third-party render engine can build out their own node system within Cinema 4D and using our new Material Nodes interface. And the node spaces allow you to, we can just really quickly...
Yeah, go for it. I think we're done with text at this point anyway.
Yeah. So if we create a new node material, let the computer catch up. It's trying to stream and show Cinema 4D all at the same time.
And at the same time, I turned off the air conditioning so that the microphone didn't pick it up, and it is rapidly getting hotter.
It's getting warm in here.
We're running multiple machines.
I'm full of hot air, so It's not surprising. But here we have the default node material for physical renderer. And you can see over here in the asset list, you're seeing all of the nodes that are available with physical render, which we've got some cool new nodes available too in physical render. But up here in the top bar here, we now have node spaces, and there's a drop down here so that we can choose to use a different node space. And as third-party render engines and Redshift integrate into our nodal material, they'll show up as additional node spaces.
So they could potentially in the future say Redshift there, and then it would be the same exact interface with all of their nodes.
Right. So we use ProRender basically as a test case for this to prove that it worked. And as we switch into ProRender, I probably shouldn't have done that because now it's going to tax your graphics card too.
Yeah, that might be dangerous doing too much rendering here while streaming.
So let's just go ahead and close that and switch back to physical render, and I'll just explain it. But as we switch into ProRender, what it's actually doing is it'll actually change all of the nodes that show up in that asset list to ProRender's nodes, and it will switch to the nodal material configuration for ProRender. So basically within a single nodal material, you can set up a standard material using standard material nodes, a ProRender material using ProRender nodes, in the future Redshift or an Octane or whatever other third-party renderer. You can define one material that contains the nodes for each renderer to make that material render properly for that renderer. So, future preset makers can create a material that works with all of the render engines, basically, because you can just swap between the different renderers and there's different node material setups.
Yeah, so that's exciting potential. That's also a lot of work for potentially whoever's making it, right? Because they would be essentially remaking material from scratch, but you could sort of make a universal material now, but they have to make it manually, and anybody who uses it
and I hope that we can help to facilitate that as this gets off the ground and more people are developing for more render engines. Hopefully we can help with the workflow on that and maybe improve the way that it works itself. But the great thing is that each render engine is going to have its own nodes, and because they all have their own advantages and disadvantages, and by implementing these node spaces, you can make the best use of each render engine for what it does. And of course, if you're just an Octane user or just a Redshift user, you can just stay in the node space for Octane or Redshift and work with our material nodal interface, but just with all of their nodes. One other thing I want to mention while we're here is in the preferences, we've added this new preference in the material tab for what material you want to create when you double click in the material manager. So by default it's standard, but you can create a PBR or an Uber material, node material. And third-party render engines actually have the ability to register a default material option into this menu. So once Octane Redshift, I'm only mentioning Octane Redshift there at the top of my mind, but once any of the third-party render engines integrate Arnold Corona, they will also be able to show up in this drop-down so that when you double-click in the material manager, you'll create an Arnold material or a Redshift material or an Octane material.
I want to know the type of person who would make their default material a hair material. That's a very special, very special kind of person. Well, while the stream is working, I want to jump into something a little bit more complicated, but my favorite new feature, which is Field Force.
Yes, please do.
Now, this is potentially going to tax the computer, so definitely send me a message if the stream drops, and we'll try and figure it out. So we'll see. We'll keep it light because, laptop, slightly older laptop. But I'm going to go ahead and scoot the setup over to me, which is actually, this is working really well as a setup.
Yeah.
Just slide the whole thing one way or the other. But let's go ahead and jump into the Field Force. And I was lucky enough yesterday to spend some time speaking with the main developer who was working on the Field Force and the new vectors inside of volumes, and get some more technical information for why I was working. Luckily, I'd already played with a lot, so I could jump right into the more technical. But why don't we jump right on in? The simple version of this is actually not terribly complicated. And you know what? In all of my other demos, I was mostly using particles, so why don't we start by making a dynamic object. So I'm going to make a cube. I'm going to shrink it down a little bit. Let's right-click. Let's add a simulation, a soft body tag. And the reason I'm adding soft body is regular dynamics. It calculates just from the axis in the center, but this will actually calculate on each individual point. But I want it to kind of behave as if it was a rigid body, so I'm just going to crank the stiffness like way up. And we could change some other settings, but that should do pretty well. If we hit play, it should fall away and look pretty much exactly like like a rigid body. I can already see from our frame rate that it's not enjoying the stream going at the same time, but let's see what we can pull off. So it's actually pretty straightforward to use some of the basic features inside of here. So we're going to go to the Simulate menu. Under Forces, we have the brand new Field Force. I'm going to click on that, and by default there's nothing in here, but we do have our velocity type, and it's saying Add to Velocity. I'm going to say, let's just set an absolute velocity, and I'm going to crank the number up a little bit bigger. And actually, I found the most straightforward way of using this thing is clicking on the solid and just making a full-on solid. And there's a vector, which is a direction. So we got X, Y, and Z, and we're saying go up on Y. So if I hit play right now, you can see immediately this cube begins going at full force at the set velocity of 500. It is just moving straight upward, which it's like, okay, that's cool. It's essentially behaving like a wind, completely taking over. Actually behave a lot like a wind if I said add to velocity. And now you can see it's actually accelerating as it goes up, and that's because this number is cartoonishly high. But you can see this wind is blowing upwards. So it's like, okay, cool, we have a wind direction. It's really easy to add in two vectors here, so this is actually moving at a diagonal now. You see the wind pushing it off to the side. We can just make it behave like a wind. Now, something I've been enjoying doing is if we click on our Field Force, we have our display, and this is just a preview. This is showing some different vectors, which you can just kind of think of as arrows. When they're green, that means they're pointing up. If I made this negative, so to go aiming down, we'll get the inverse color, which is kind of this pink-purple color. But this display tab is really important because it's showing us a cross-section, essentially, of what we're seeing, but you're not limited to this area. It's actually calculating infinitely. It's actually calculating each individual point of this cube into these vectors, into this Field Force, and it's going to push it from there. So in order to visualize this maybe a little bit cleaner, I'm actually going to make this really skinny and really tall, and now we're just getting this big old cross-section here, and it's a little bit easier to visualize exactly what we're getting. So along those lines, okay, cool, we got a Field Force, but instead of using this solid, why don't we go ahead and create something like a random field? And like I said, this random field is actually in big 3D space. Let's go ahead and increase the scale. You can already see it was set to noise by default. And you know what? Let's go ahead and give ourselves a couple extra little ticks here. And now you can actually see how the noise is changing the direction. But we're seeing a cross section here. So the wind isn't just specifically pushing upward. And actually with it being random, I'm going to go ahead and just set this to set absolute velocity back to 500. You see that let's turn off clamping as well. Actually, is that, oh, it is moving. It's just moving it's actually probably getting trapped there. I'll explain that in a second. But I'm going to go back to display, and right now we have a display vector length. We got a couple different modes here. We could just say brightness, which is going to be how powerful it is, and it's not worried about the color anymore. But we also have line length, and I could set that down like 0.1. So it's visually not as large, but we can get a nice kind of preview of what we're seeing. I'm going to pick a different random seed here just to make sure that it can move. Now you can see our cube is moving around in 3D space. Let's give it even more power and speed. 5,000 is probably going overboard, but let's go ahead and crank that up. And you can see it's actually getting stopped in some of these places. I can fix that by giving it a little bit of animation speed. Now you can see it's going to be wanting to drift around. And we could actually, yeah, okay, turning on some add the velocity is really going to be zipping around. So that is fun, and using the cross section here to see it is just such a better visual way of seeing it than if I were to jump this up to like 2,000 here. And it's like, what am I seeing?
Yeah.
It's the same noise, but you don't get that kind of intuitive vibe for what you're getting. And obviously it's calculating up our points there, so you can hear my fan cranking up. So, oh man, this stuff gets really fun really fast because of the way you can start combining things. So this is my random field, but let's go ahead and make our initial solid, and that's saying to travel upward. And now you can see, without changing anything, the random field is essentially getting added when you're on normal. It's kind of overriding on top of it, but we're getting this general upward motion, and our velocity is very high right now. We're getting this general upward motion. Set absolute velocity should probably be what I stick with. So you see general upward, but moving around left to right a little bit. But things start getting really interesting really quickly. And actually, I probably should have talked about masks in the beginning a little bit more. But there's a new setting inside of all fields now, inside of cloners and everything, which is this mask setting. So I can add a mask to this random field, and we can feed whatever we want there as a mask. So if I jump into, let's do a real straightforward one, I'll make a spherical field. So the spherical field by itself would be behaving pretty cool. Let's scale up the spherical force here. So you can see this is actually turned in kind of an attractor. It's pulling this towards the center, and wherever I move this, it's going to be kind of pulling our cube. In addition to kind of trying to go up, in addition to kind of being random, it's trying to pull up. So that's the way a spherical field behaves normally. But if I make that spherical field instead a mask on that random field, then what should happen if I turn on this little checkbox, then the randomness has now been limited to where the spherical field is. But all of the fall-offs, all the remapping, everything continues to work. So you can see I can make a smaller fall-off here. I can crank this up really big, and you can see that the wind, well, not the wind, but this random noise is, full power all the, every direction. And when it escapes now, it goes straight up, completely override it. Let's go ahead and make a couple. Hopefully it doesn't make it go too slow, but I'm going to put the cube into a cloner so we get a couple of them moving, just get that extra randomness. So put that in the cloner, and I will set this to a grid array, and let's go ahead and set to 1 and go for a cross. Just get a little more, maybe see a little bit more of the information. Okay, it's still running pretty well actually. So yeah, this is blowing around really nicely. I just want to jump to some of the key variables here because I talk about this already in the other parts, but something that kind of blew my mind was the ability to add splines in here. So I want to simplify this. I'm going to turn off the random field, but let's go ahead and create just actually, why don't we make a helix spline this time? So I got a helix spline, let's have it face the camera. I'm going to go ahead and set the start radius to 0 so we get this big old spiral going, and the height to 0 so we just get this nice big flat spiral. Let's go ahead and do our field force, and I'm going to add that in. In fact, I'm going to turn off our solid as well, so we're just seeing this helix. And you can see that it's like, okay, it's traveling along the spline, but it looks a little bit weird. So what I found is inside of the setting here, we want to grab our offset and go full power. Now you can see that it looks a little bit more consistent. The arrows are full strength all the way around. And hitting play right now, hopefully, you're going to see all of our cubes are getting pulled to kind of near the spline and just getting dragged into the center. So while we could use something like the radial field, just by throwing in this helix spline, we now can have them drag in. But if I click on our helix and say reverse, then now they're going to be traveling the opposite direction. in addition to being able to hit reverse there, you can also go into your field force and click on your direction. And we have this main value, but we could say invert direction. That'll do the same thing, travel the other way. We have our scale, which essentially is the power. We're scaling the vector is the way to think about that. So you can make it a lot weaker. They'll be traveling a lot slower, crank it up, or go up beyond 100%. They'll really be adding a lot of power. But you see, these are sort of overriding everything. This is full power at the full distance. You can even see no matter how far these travel in space, like way over here, the nearest spline point is right there. So that's the direction it will travel, just forever. So something that's really cool is if we got different modes here. So let's go ahead and change this mode inside of our helix. Go to the layer. Right now it's looking for traveling along the spline. We're going to say, no. I want it to be the radius of the spline. Let's go ahead and start increasing our radius here. And now what's happening is it is trying to attract every one of these cubes.
To the spline.
Pull it to the spline, like right to the nearest point that it is available here. So that automatically awesome. We could also make these repulsing by going to direction and inverting that. Now it's getting pushed away from those. It's 3D space, so they just get pushed away that direction. But where this gets really, really cool and interesting to me is the idea of combining these. So I'm going to set it to along, and then I'm going to make a mask. I'm going to feed it that exact same helix spline again. And this one, I'm going to set it to be the radius. And now this is being treated as a fall off instead of a direction. So now you can see that we're fading out based on this fall off, which we can even, once again, remap. Like I can make this full power up to the edge or fade out or change it to a curve. But now any of the cubes that were within range to touch this, they are going to get pulled along.
And like when that one in the middle falls down far enough to the spline, it'll start getting pulled around in the force, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's starting to happen already.
Yeah, so yeah, very gently getting pulled along. So let's go ahead and reverse that again. And let's go back into our field force and let's go ahead and put that solid back on. And now you can see we have our solid, which is constantly pushing everything upward. But as it gets near this helix, those might take over and they'll start spinning. Now this is currently set to absolute velocity. So this radius probably isn't quite big enough to capture them. So let's go ahead and crank up that radius a little bit bigger. I don't want to go too far. So that should do a better job of capturing. And in the remap, I can also strengthen that up a little bit. So now they do have the ability to travel upward. In fact, why don't we just visualize that by grabbing our helix and I'm going to pull it up into the air. So now you can see, even though we're not getting the preview, they'll travel upward and suddenly they get pulled up into that helix so awesome. And they start traveling around. But the upwardness is still pulling them, so they might escape. But you can also, you can start combining things in such crazy ways because now we could also drag that helix spline in again. And now they're combining in a new way by setting that to a radius and starting to increase that. Now this is also becoming an attractor on top of it. Those are adding together. So now it's saying like, I want to pull towards the spline, but also travel along it. And we could change this to add to the previous one. And now they're combining those two. So now they're being both attracted to the line and traveling along the line. So now you see they didn't escape. And this is just by applying the same helix spline again and again and again in different ways and combining them. The idea of merging these things and adding noise on top of it. We can add the noise. Let's get rid of that mask. And now we've got randomness traveling all over the place. And they'll drift around. But when they get near this spline, they'll suddenly get pulled to it and begin traveling around. And keep in mind, this is just a single field force. So this is turbulence, wind, like a friction, gravity, all of those kind of combined into one super version. One super, not field force, but just a force for particles, for dynamics. And there's another thing that, it would affect hair as well. Yeah. So like it's integrated in so many different places in cinema. And once again, keep in mind that I'm treating this like it's a 2D plane, but this is actually 3D. It's almost like there's a big capsule shape that's swept along it. And if something was traveling from the side and suddenly collided with it going that direction, that would get pulled in as well. So that's where these things start getting so exciting. I'm barely scratching the surface here. I'm going to go ahead and pop open a scene file real quick.
Yeah, and while you're doing that, I think that what's really cool about this feature is the opportunity to really get in an art direct dynamic simulations and experiment with the way that they actually are going to feed out, because you can just move the different forces, the different objects that feed into the force. Some people on chat are mentioning galaxies. Effectatron mentioned river animations, text animation. I think it'd be really cool
river.
to put.
I didn't even think about like the idea of a river where it's traveling along a surface, but like bobbing up and down. Like that would be super cool. But you can also have like waves, but those waves could be animated as geometry, and then that could come in as a new surface that's referencing. Like you saw me dragging a spline, but we can drag in an object as a volume or an object to start being treated at. Not a child, he's dragging in like that. And this cube can have fall offs as well. We can have, it can be looking at the points, it can be looking at the surface, it can be looking at the volume. That all modifies everything as well. And once again, it all just combines. It gets super crazy.
Yeah. And if you were to use a text spline, you could do some really cool like motion graphic stuff with, particles and dynamics feeding into that text shape too.
Just because somebody's asking, I'm going to throw in a plane object here. And I'm going to throw our soft body tag onto it and get rid of all that stiffness. And I'm not even going to change, misclick, get rid of the stiffness. I'm not even going to change anything else. Let's just make a material so we can see it a little bit better. So without adding anything else in the scene, I'm just going to play. And immediately you can see that this is getting twirled around in the center. If I grab my helix and let's go ahead and reverse it, this piece of cloth is going to travel along the spline. Based on it getting attracted in, we could have it getting pushed out. We could layer noises on top of it, but all the dynamic settings are still live on top of it. So we could be like, you know what, let's add a little bit of stiffness so it's going to maintain its original shape a little bit better. We could change the structure, the shear, everything, and have so much control over the way this piece of cloth would be behaving. So yeah, this art directing cloth, trivial now, crazy awesome way of layering that. I'm going to pop open a scene file that I just thought was kind of cool. So same everything. Actually, we'll talk about the volume builder in just a moment, but I'm using the volume builder a little bit, but this is just generating a bunch of particles with a tracer on it, and it's traveling along some noise, but I also fed in some text. So now it's just a perfect combination of, you can hear my fan going though, man, it doesn't like the scene. So let's calm that one down. But you can see just this text up here and everything, these swirls traveling around, points getting generated. It's just like, oh my God, it's so awesome.
That's
and it came together so quick.
I want that scene.
Yeah. And
I'm actually excited to be here because you're teaching me R21. With the way things have been at Maxon lately, craziness with trying to get the My Maxon stuff going. I haven't had as much time as I'd love to play with all this stuff, and it's just so cool to see it, and you make everything look so fun and easy.
So before I pass it back to Rick to show off maybe the Miximo stuff or something next,
sure.
I want to spend 1 second talking about the volume builder along these lines, because it behaves in a very similar way, but there's some very specific additional features to go along with it. So this time we will create some particles. I'm going to go to simulate. We're going to add in particles. Something I found out was that these particles are actually running a lot faster in this version of Cinema 4D.
Yeah, the developers did a great job of optimizing the particles themselves and the way they're drawn into the viewport. So a lot faster performance with the standard particle system. And there's a few other little new options hidden in there too.
Oh yeah, I found out. This is super crazy. I was actually talking to the developer and I was like, what we really need is the ability to animate the number of particles, because you can't do that. And as I'm saying, I was looking, I was like, wait a minute, look, we can keyframe those now. I was like, what? So that by itself is huge. Okay, really straightforward. We've got some particles being emitted traveling upward. Now, we're going to go and use the volume builder, which of course we've been using for a while to make some really cool blobby shapes and merging and biting things out. It's just a super cool new way of modeling in cinema in R20. But there is now a new volume type, which is vectors. Change it over to that, and let's go ahead and start feeding this. Let's go ahead and feed it another random field, because those look cool. I'm going to drag it in, and instantly we're going to see it's going to generate the big cloud. Now this time it does behave in, actually, before I get to the random field, let's do a linear field. If I put a linear field in, you can see it's naturally got a direction. And it's kind of normalizing it automatically, so it's full power because it knows the direction, because that's what a linear field does. I'm going to go ahead and make this linear field inside of the volume builder. There is, on every object, there is a creation space.
Right.
This doesn't calculate to infinity in all directions. It's only within the bounding box. Very important to note. But I'm going to go ahead and set this to be a really skinny on X, pretty much 0. And we're going to make it really big again. So we're kind of viewing it as a 2D grid, but this time it really is a 2D grid. But these are now all traveling straight forward. But now I'm going to go ahead and let's feed it a random field. And in that random field, I'm going to go ahead and say the random field should the shape should just adapt to whatever's below it automatically. That's so cool that you don't have to set the setting again and again and again. You say, nope, behave just like the one below. Let's go ahead on the random field, and I'm going to change some settings in there. Let's go ahead and make our noise way bigger and jump it up 10 times the scale. We can instantly see the way it's kind of flowing. And now I'm going to change our noise type. We've just been on the basic Perlin. I'm going to go ahead and set it onto a Voronoi. And now we get this Voronoi noise where it's all being attracted in, or if we reverse it, pushing out from every single one of these shapes. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play if I wanted to. And actually, hitting play won't do anything right now because this isn't applying anywhere, so I won't worry about that quite yet. But I want to talk about some other settings that are unique to using the volume builder. And that is, one of them is the ability for it to combine in some different ways. So we can do a normal add, subtract, but then there's a cross product between them. And I had Fritz explaining to me exactly what that meant, and it's a little bit specific and technical, but let me go ahead and pull up the camera for a second.
It involves math.
There's a lot of math, but the basic idea is I'm feeding a linear field, so all of the points are facing in that direction. So what it's doing is it's taking the noise and being like, okay, that's my axis, and I can spin around that. So am I this direction? Am I that direction? And it's looking at the noise and calculating it that way. But what that means is the cross product, because I'm pointing in straight line, means it's going to be flat, but choosing a direction. So it's going to maintain the 2D direction. So let's jump back to the screen here. And now by putting this to cross product, back to normal, you can see it's kind of frontal, but by doing the cross product, it's important to note as well that these are three-dimensional. These are pointing in angles in every different way. But by setting that to the cross product, it's now spinning around that axis. Not only is that a really cool looking shape, you can see it's completely flat now. There's no direction on X whatsoever. So those are spiraling around automatically, super cool. But then you can also see that we have things like rotate and invert to change the direction. We can normalize to make them all be kind of 100% power. We could change the scale in an absolute way, but then we have a smooth. So if I create this smooth and I start dragging it back and forth, you can see that we can go from these super cool circles, but it's very harsh. It's going to transition. There's kind of no transition between one spiral and the next. But by adding in some of the smoothing, it's going to start blurring them together. We get these nice smooth transitions flowing from one to the next. And you can just see here, very obvious shapes. And as I pull it up, it's blurred more and more. And you can start pushing this beyond. Actually, you can't go beyond 100%, but we can do additional iterations or changing the voxel distance. And you can see it can get smoother and smoother and smoother as we want, and we can pull that up nice and blurry. So just real quick before we move on to a new feature, and I'll check questions to see if there's anything we can tinker with there. But we can also, somebody's saying in the chat, vector curl. So there is vector curl here. I already sort of forgot the way that Fritz explained, but we actually did it here. It's doing a similar thing where it takes a particular angle and then does some math to make it the opposite angle. Not inverting it, but it's kind of like, it's already got like two axes and it's making it project on the third axis. So by putting this vector curl on top of the noise we had, it's kind of making a two-directional field. So it's facing one direction or the opposite. It's pretty cool. I haven't completely wrapped my head around it, but it's pretty neat. But in order to actually apply this to our particles, let's go ahead and create another field force. And we just drag in our volume builder as a volume object. And now it's just been fed in. Let's go ahead and say, change direction, so they're always moving at the same speed. And with any luck, I can just hit play, and boom, we get our particles flowing all around this surface. Something that's really cool to note as well is that this is automatically kind of cached. It's running really quickly, even on this laptop while streaming, so I'm impressed. It kind of caches this, but you can see it actually will slow down a lot if I give it some animation speed, because by giving it animation speed, it's having to do all of these calculations come again from scratch. So that will significantly slow you down. I'm going to leave that not animated, but you can see these twirling around.
But you could use the new volume builder cache to cache that animation.
Does it cache animations?
I think it will.
I did not know it cached animations. If I turn that on, oh, it is an animation. I didn't know that. Let's see if this works. I'm going to give the random field some animation speed, and let's go ahead and cache it. It's cranking all the way through 90 frames.
This new volume builder cache is great too, because you can get to a point, whether you're modeling or using this vector volumes, you can get to a point where you're ready to like lock in a certain part of it, cache that off, and then you can continue building on top
look at that.
of it.
Look how quick it's running now. So yeah, that totally works with animation. I had no idea that did. So yeah, now we get this cached animation. They're flowing through. We can go ahead and select our emitter. Let's go ahead and create a MoGraph tracer. Now we get these lines tracing around, like instantly, like, oh, gorgeous.
So cool.
And then going back along the lines of the scene file we were just talking about, if we just make some text here, make a text object. Let's hit R for rotate. We'll spin it in again. There we go. T for scale. Ooh, let's grab the text. T for scale, make it pretty big. It's not a very beefy around font, but let's go ahead and just type in Rick. And I would probably want to round it. In my other example, I rounded it because you want some rounded corners here a little bit.
Right.
But in the field force, we can just go ahead and add the text on top of what the volume builder was doing. I don't know what this is going to do by default, but let's hit play. And already you can see it's flowing around the text. Obviously, we'd want to do what I had kind of said, which is crank up your offset all the way so all the text is showing up. Let's go ahead and, if we hide our volume builder, go back to our field force, go to display, show all of the points, drop this back down to box size 0 and jump that back up to 2000 by 2000. Then we can start visualizing this a little bit better. So, and then see me showing the line length. I'm going to scale this up a little bit. You can see how it's completely overriding, completely taking over. But if we go ahead and do that same mask trick, field force, object tab, add a mask, drag in the text a second time, tell this one to be based off of the radius and give it some fall off here, then now you get the curve just around there, and then it can be adding on top of whatever the volume builder was doing below. So this is still sort of taking over, but you can see when it escapes, that's going smooth. But if we say, hey, add those together, then hopefully we can get them, well, I'm doing some setting wrong there, but turn off clamp, add volume builder. Well, I'm forgetting some setting here, but essentially this is the same setup I had with this text flowing around. We can just see here I had a spherical field pulling everything towards the center, connect objects set to normal. Those were adding. I'm not sure what I did wrong, but it's pretty straightforward making this. I just accidentally put this together. I'm gonna go ahead and check the chat. Is there anything to add onto Field Force that I didn't think of while I check the chat and see if there's any specific questions?
I'm sure there's a lot here, and I'm really excited to see what people do with it.
Oh my god, it's so crazy.
It's really awesome. I don't have anything right now to add that I can think of.
I personally, I think this might be the most advanced thing that has ever been added to cinema, outside of maybe like Espresso and Thinking Particles when those came out, where it's just like it can do so. You can treat it really simple, and you got to think about it correctly, because if you just start randomly combining things, it might make some cool motion, but you don't know why it's behaving. So understanding what is happening and why it's happening, I think, is vital.
Yeah, but part of the fun of Cinema 4D is just throwing stuff in dialogues and seeing what happens.
That's true. I mean, everybody has just played with metaballs because those are fun, and then fracturing is just fun. But if you want to start art directing it, being meticulous, building things in a way that's very intentional is going to go a long way. And I think you can make your dynamics and your particles just... I mean, they're now infinitely art directable. It's going to be crazy.
Right. I'm having trouble pulling up the chat here because the internet here is great. But one of the things that I did see in the chat was some people were asking about the new user data options.
Oh, yeah.
So while you're checking for other questions, this is something I can address really quickly. And there is the new user data tag that you can add on. And this just provides a placeholder for you to... It's just sort of an empty tag so that you can add user data onto an object really easily. But one of the really cool things, I think a more interesting thing that's been added to user data is that now we have the ability to save and load user data presets.
Oh.
So this is especially handy if you do a lot of rigging. So like you could say leg roll or ankle roll. I don't know. I don't do a lot of rigging, but but you know, you can set all this up and you can create a new data, and you can say, you know, toe, point, whatever. And you set up each of these with all of the limits that you want, with all of the, you know, if you want this to be in degrees, sliders, you can set all of that up the way you want it. We can add a group and drop this out and call this foot controls. I can't type.
Yeah, new keyboard.
Yeah. And then you select this and you just say save preset. And we'll just say foot rig. And then we hit OK. And now we can delete this. And if we hit load preset, we can pull in the foot rig. and here's all of our foot control with the slider settings, all the user data settings that we set.
That is awesome.
I mean, especially for character riggers who are very consistently setting up the same user data every single time, I think this is really handy.
Yeah, this is great. Couple questions popping in. A subscription question, which was earlier. It's a good question. Scotty is asking, what's the deal with Cineversity now and subscription?
So
because you had the
Cineversity-
MSA, it was included, right?
Right. So when you had
In the
MSA,
US. MSA in the US.
no, actually worldwide.
Oh, okay.
When you had the MSA, which is a subscription, Cineversity was included with that subscription. And when you have the Maxon subscription, Cineversity is included with that as well. And one of the really cool things that we've done is, we think we've done. It's still being worked on, but we've actually integrated it single sign-on with your MyMaxon account. So you'll be able to simply log into Cineversity with the same email, password, login that you log into Cinema 4D with.
Okay, and is okay. That's really cool. And yeah, I don't know if I said it during this, but I've been jumping between the laptop and my main machine, and I've just got the one license. But it's been so easy to jump on the laptop and be like, oh, I didn't log out. Log out here. It dumps the license from the other one and jumps it on here. It's like, oh, this is so simple.
I have access to all the licenses I could possibly want of Cinema 4D, but it's so frustrating to have to
go to
log
the
in, email myself a serial number, get the serial number,
call the
pasted
office,
in.
go to my machine, log out.
And it's been a joy since we started implementing this. All I have to do is log in with my username and password on any machine, and bop, there's my license. Sign out of one computer, sign on to another. So it's really nice and flexible.
Let's see. Zunder, no, there's no Espresso UI update at all. Although it's something I should note is with all the field force stuff we were just doing, you can actually implement all that into thinking particles now, which maybe will breathe a little more life into thinking particles again. I mean, XP is such a ubiquitous plugin at this point that I almost don't even think of it as a plugin. It's like, well, everybody has. If you're doing any particle work, of course you have X particles.
Yeah.
But this really opens up a lot of really cool possibilities. I wonder if they'll be able to tie into that as a effect as well.
Well, I think in some ways they already do, not as a field force, but because they've already implemented some support for fields within the X particle system itself. But yeah, there's some great opportunities there. Supporting it with thinking particles, it's just a matter of completeness and making sure that the option's there for people who want to pursue that.
Scotty's asking, he has an MSA. He has an MSA that will transfer into perpetual, so still no university in that scenario?
That's a good question, and one that I'm not 100% sure I have the answer to today. But we will, obviously people have a lot of questions, and definitely if you haven't read through the FAQ that's on the website, I suggest that because that answers a lot of the questions. I know there's still questions beyond that we didn't think of as we were writing the FAQ, and once the craziness of SIGGRAPH's over and we have a chance to powwow again, we'll be able to sort out some of those and clarify some of the various very specific issues that people have asked about.
Excellent. Let's see. Is there any speed up in the timeline? Well, the particles are really sped up.
The timeline is really sped up. So one of the things that we kind of talked about the high DPI support on Windows. We've talked about some of the results, the high DPI support on Windows and the dark mode support on Mac and things like that. Where those come from is really a complete overhaul of the underlying way that we draw the user interface. And along the way of doing that, they were able to find a lot of really great optimizations. So some of our beta testers have reported 10 times speed up in animations when you have the timeline open. I know that it's been a pain point for a long time in Cinema 4D actually animating with the timeline open, because especially if you had a lot of keyframes, because it took a lot of processing power just to draw those keyframes on the screen. And they really optimized that so that now animating with timeline is a lot faster than it has been before.
Cool. Yeah, I didn't know that one either.
It's one of those things that's it's hard to show and it's hard to even communicate sometimes, because it it is very scene dependent. And even system dependent, but I've heard great reports from a lot of our beta testers about the speed up that they're seeing in that.
I don't know exactly what this means, but any support for USD and Hydra. I don't know what those are.
USD and Hydra are certainly what they are is sort of an open source. Well, USD is an open source scene description format from Pixar, and Hydra is sort of a related technology that sort of allows you to plug in different render engines to different scene descriptions. It's kind of a connector object of piping things from one thing to the next. It's certainly something that's on our radar. I've been to some presentations here at SIGGRAPH about it, but we can't announce any specific plans for support at this point.
Somebody's asking about the Denoiser, and we might be able to jump to that because it's pretty quick to demo. I don't have any scenes prepared. Actually,
I might
actually.
But we're probably going to kill your laptop trying. Oh wait, we need to switch to the screen, right?
There you go. You get it.
See, old fashioned. There we go. Okay.
Whatever it is, let's do a simple render.
Where are my files? There we go. And nodes. No, that's not it. Did I put it on here? I may not have put it on here. Bummer.
Well, we
we can just talk about it.
Well, let's whoop something up real quick. Okay. We don't have to make anything too fancy.
Well, you work while I talk.
Yeah.
So the really cool thing about the Denoiser, first of all, is that, and first of all, I should say up front, this is some great technology that Intel's provided. It's the Intel Open Image Denoiser, and it uses artificial intelligence to denoise footage. And it does an amazing. I haven't played around a whole lot with it, and just last week I was creating some demo files for SIGGRAPH that I forgot to put on this machine. But I was, if anyone remembers my lollipop scene from R20, I was rendering that, and that scene took, I think, an hour a frame to render back in R20, and it was probably roughly 50, 60 progressive passes that I was using to render. And last week I rendered that, and I just stopped it after one progressive pass, and it was noisy as all get out. And as soon as the Open Image Denoiser kicked in, it just got gorgeous. So even just one progressive pass, the Denoiser can get you to a usable, shippable final result. And the great thing is that this Denoiser, it's implemented as a post effect, and so it doesn't matter what render engine you use. You can add it on at the back of any render chain and denoise footage from any renderer. I know that a lot of the other renderers have other denoiser options, but this provides you with another option.
All right, terrible scene file, but we got something. I'm going to drop all these settings way down. Let's even throw on some global illumination. What's your go-to?
QMC.
QMC and then QMC option. I'm not gonna worry about any options. Let me just make sure this isn't insanely long. Rendering. It's gonna. Okay, that's. We're gonna render this out to picture view, but we're gonna make the resolution real small. I'm gonna jump it to about 600 by 600. So let's go ahead and even save this out to the picture viewer. So I'm gonna let this entire thing render, and hopefully we're gonna see a bunch of grain. Okay, it's going to get real noisy, and hopefully we don't drop any frames, but let's let this run through here. It might still take a little too long.
One of the things while this is rendering, if I can talk over the loud CPU fan, one of the things that the scene I was actually trying to create when I was discovering how great this Denoiser is pointing out the new AOV options within the node-based materials for physical renderer. And those are really cool because you can output specific masks of, not just masks, but specific textures and specific materials at different parts in the nodal tree into their own multipass. So lots of cool options there.
Yeah, I had to ask you what an AOV was. Because in the third-party renders,
arbitrary output value, I think.
Value, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like a super object ID essentially, but for a material and whatever part of the material you want to pipe out. And then
so you can actually pipe out color data. It's not just a black and white mask. So if you want to just pull out like the raw texture, the the unlit logo, and be able to comp that back over, you can do that. So this is suitably grainy.
I think this is a decent candidate. So this is just the raw image. Almost done. Okay, cool. So that is it without it turned on. Now let's go ahead and right click. And
I didn't realize you didn't turn it on.
I didn't turn it on. So it's supposed to be, I wanted to A/B it. So now we've got the denoiser. I'm not even. There's like almost no settings here.
Right. So there is. Let's go ahead and start it, and I'll talk.
Okay.
There is the option here to actually feed in albedo pass and or color pass in order to use that to sort of guide the AI to choose the right denoising.
Just makes it a little cleaner and smarter then.
Yeah, honestly, I haven't played with this a whole lot, but I've never actually changed that setting. So, and it's always turned out great. So,
is the denoiser only going to work on an Intel CPU?
I believe it works. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it works on Intel or AMD.
It's just code, so
yeah, and it's actually, I mean, just like Embry, the technology that we use for accelerating ray tracing works on any processor as well.
Let's see. Suspense is killing me, says Effectatron. Yeah, let's see. Okay, just cranking through.
We're getting there bucket by bucket.
Yep, we're getting. Oh, another thing you mentioned to me is that right now, obviously I've only got physical standard and pro render on this machine, but that there's no reason that this shouldn't work on a third-party render because it's just a post effect.
Yep, exactly. So again, a lot of those third-party engines have denoisers built in as well, but this gives you another option, and you can see if this will. And look at that. I mean, it's not in this case not perfect.
Well, I intentionally put it really low, and
we
we're
could
also
have increased the passes just a little bit more.
But it'll zoom way up. For anybody, I don't know how well it's coming through on the stream, but if we zoom way up, you can see all this horrible grain, and then we can just click through, and it's like boop, 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 boop. So like this is once again not the best example of this, but I was testing it, and it added like 1 second of render time,
right?
And it was like, oh my god, it would take an extra hour to make cinema look like that.
Yeah.
To get rid of that much grain, and it's just like nope, gets rid of it. And the more time you do let it process, then the less grain it has inherently, and it can clean it up even better.
Right.
But especially cranking a still out really quickly, like it's just a magical one-click solution to make it work.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's a big one. I mean, it's almost like there's never a reason not to throw that on every single render.
No, yeah, it probably should just be in the default presets. I'll make a note of that.
Yeah, and I haven't done a lot of A/B.
And see if there's any more comments here.
I haven't done any A/B, or I haven't done a bunch of testing with like different scenes and different resolutions and whatnot. But everything I have tinkered with, it's just automatically worked and looked really good for whatever the input was in. Somebody's even saying that you could do a workflow. There's no reason you couldn't just take an image, an image sequence rendered from something else, or even like grainy footage of taking it off your iPhone or something,
right? And
then put it on a plane, render it out, like so it's instant render, and let this algorithm just apply on top of that footage as well.
Totally. Somebody just recognized that I'm the voice of the Maxon tutorials.
Yep. So would you like to try and do the Miximo stuff? That's gonna be
sure. That's a good.
This is an untested area. We haven't seen these scene files, and also I if you guys watch my R21 video, when I tried to apply to a character, I obviously did something wrong because it was kind of horrifying. But
so I do have to off the bat say thank you to Steve Teeple, we call him Teeps, who sat with me in the booth this morning and helped me to learn how this works because it's a new workflow for me. But I'm excited about it because, character rigging has always been something that's a bit of a challenge, I think. And Miximo is such a great resource for automatically weighting your characters, automatically, getting all this great mocap data and pulling it in. And this rig allows you to actually apply that really easily, but then actually adjust the animation on top of it. So this is a raw FBX that this is Steve's character, and this is a raw FBX that he got back down from Miximo. It's just an idle motion. But basically, you export your character from Cinema 4D and import it into Miximo, and Miximo processes the weights and you can apply animation, and then you download that FBX back down into Cinema 4D and you get something like this. You'll get a Miximo rig that's prefixed with Miximo Rig, and this is one of the things that I think where yours went wrong, Chris. I'm not exactly sure where in the workflow it did, but what we can do now is we want to go into the weight tag and reset the bind pose just to get this guy back to starting point. And we're going to go ahead and add a new character object. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the character object, this simplifies that rigging process greatly. There's an advanced biped rig, quadruped rig. You can use these rigs to sort of get started with setting things up.
This came in like R13 or something.
Yeah, and I'll mention that when you're not using Miximo, when you're creating your own custom rig and defining your own weighting, the weight algorithms have actually been improved to be a lot more accurate now. And even there's the option for third parties to write their own weighting algorithms. So if there's new papers that come out that we figure out that there's some volumetric super bone glow that's better than volumetric bone glow, which we added in 21, you can actually write that algorithm and add it into Cinema 4D as a plugin. But anyway, the character control that we want to choose here is the Miximo control rig. And we're just going to build this out, and it's as simple as just saying we want a root, we want a pelvis. You can hold down the control key and click arm so that you get both arms at the same time, and then click hand so that you get a hand on each of the arms. We jump back up to the pelvis and we hold down the control key to create both legs at the same time. So now we've got our basic leg in T pose. This character is actually kind of in A pose, but there's some special magic here within the Miximo control rig that means that when I jump to the adjust tab, it actually just snaps immediately into place where it's supposed to be.
From what imported? So it's looking.
I don't know how the magic works. I just know the magic's there. Well,
this is happening because there's already that entire like joint structure that came in from Miximo. So
right. I think they're basically matching the joints that came from Miximo. Exactly. Okay. So then we can go to animate, and there's options here, but we need to do a couple more steps first. We can go into the root, and you can see here that it's asking what the namespace is. This is basically that prefix on everything in the rig, and it's, in this case, Miximo Rig. But if you were bringing in multiple animations, they had different names, basically. You could say what you needed to retarget to. And then you just hit this retarget all button, and that retargets the entire motion capture to the bind skeleton of the character object, or vice versa. I'm not sure how it works. And then what we need to do is just transfer the weights onto the object. So we drag the object down in here and hit transfer weights, and that's going to actually apply the weighting onto the object. So now we can go ahead and simply hit play here, and you'll see that we've got it's a very subtle animation. It's a very subtle animation, but we've got the animation here. And the cool thing is that I can select the controllers, and I can do IK animation on top of that animation that's coming in from Miximo. And you can even go in here into the character object controls, and you can adjust the blending between the IK animation and the mocap data that's coming in from Miximo. Again, I'm super excited about this. Steve Teeple, who already created a tutorial on working for First University on working with Miximo data in Cinema 4D, you should have seen his excitement when he saw all of this implemented in R21. And so this, I think, is going to be really fun and great for people who are like me, who don't know that much about character animation, but kind of need to pull out a character animation from time to time.
Exactly. I definitely need to tinker with this more. I always kind of built my rigs from scratch, so I never used the character tool that much. But this automatically, like Miximo is such a great workflow on top of everything in general. It's like, all these great animations, you can pull them into the Cinema 4D so easily, so it just adds so much onto that. Okay, what is next? Did you have other scene files specifically to go check out? I definitely have somebody asking about some of the new UV stuff in this version.
Oh boy. Okay. What do I have else to talk about? This is just a cool little thing that one of our programmers posted the other day. Some of the new physical render nodes, and because we've got this new, ironically enough, we got this new node for blurring in 2D space. But the interesting thing is that you can blur something in 2D space and then do a smooth step and actually make it crisp again. So here's a very low res logo, but we're just putting it through this very simple blur and then smooth step. Actually, let's just go ahead and mute the smooth step for now. I got to learn how to do this stuff better, but let's just jump that straight over there. Yeah. And so we see here now that it's blurry, right? Mm-hmm. And then we drop the smooth step back in, and we actually get a nice crisp logo out of it. So the combination actually of just a few nodes can create a really cool effect there. There's a number of new 2D nodes. We can get the average color of an area. We can do blurring. The kernel provides some really crazy options that I guess people who use Photoshop in the 1980s know how to do. But it's a cool one to experiment with.
And there's a bunch of presets, so you can get like the outline effect that Photoshop has, and a bunch of, there's like, you could box blur or something with it. There's like a whole list of presets, but it's some sort of math you plug in and it magically does it.
Yeah,
presets go a long way.
There's some like trace multi-ray options and get context, so you can get really nerdy with the nodes. The great thing about the nodal editor, though, is that once people package things up, you can get something nice and clean like the Uber material, so that you don't actually have to jump into that nodal editor all the time. You can just go in here and work with a material interface like we were used to from the days of C4D old. Yep.
I mean, this is still my go-to. So
yeah.
There's that new cell generator.
Right, the new Voronoi cell generator thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like you can feed in an image and then it's going to adapt based on the fall off of the image or the black and white value, and then it's going to generate cells like a Voronoi does.
And somebody was asking about the pro render improvements. I don't think, because we're already taxing this laptop, it's a good idea to demo those here, especially because I'm not that familiar with them, so I probably wouldn't do a great job. But there is a completely new nodal interface for pro render, and there's actually implemented in there is actually volume rendering.
Yeah,
so you can actually get volumetric rendering of gases and clouds and stuff within pro render.
Let's see. What happens with Team Render now with subscriptions?
There's really no change. Team Render is available with your Cinema 4D R21 subscription.
Let's see. Handy, useful, people liking that stuff. No specific questions. Yeah, definitely can't render volume stuff on this machine. That would completely explode. Even just starting out Pro Render, I think it would be like so let's see. Hey everybody, thanks for coming and hanging out. Let's talk about some of the UV stuff in general. First of all, I mean, just a bunch of objects have way better UVs, right?
Yeah, and that's a great start, is that a lot of the primitives have gotten updated UVs so that there's a better UV layout to start. Oh, and while we're talking about primitives, so we've been doing this. Okay. Are we on the screen? Switch to the screen first. And then switch here. Okay. We've been for the last few versions, it's kind of just been the little bottom listing on the modeling page of new features, but we've been building an entirely new modeling core under the hood, and that's going to be it's increasingly, as we build more and more stuff against that new modeling core, it's increasing our ability to ensure that we've got robust modeling operations, and as we move forward, we'll have new modeling operations. But a lot of the primitives have been updated to have new, better UVs, and also I think something that everybody's going to love, I know I do, is that for instance, when you make a cylinder editable now, you don't need to worry about optimizing it anymore because the caps are just always connected by default.
Yep.
So that's really nice. But the UVs that you get with this now are... Well, that's not a good example.
Or you can just toss a checkerboard on...
Yeah, but basically the UVs have been improved on a lot of these primitives, and there's this new UV transform tool that's really handy as well. So we find that
UV mode, I think.
Yes, and then I need to. I'm still getting used to the new menus, guys.
Well, so that button right there that's currently in yellow.
Thank you. Chris is taking care of me here. So this works pretty much just like the transform tool in Photoshop. Based on where you click, you can actually control what happens. So we can scale or rotate. And you can also move this origin point to any spot. So if you wanted to rotate around that spot, you just move the origin point. It snaps into that corner. And now we can rotate around that spot. So it makes it really easy to manipulate a whole group of UVs all at the same time. Also, a lot of the modeling tools, as we transition to the new modeling core, are preserving UVs better. So like when you do an extrude inner or an extrude, a weld, the resulting UVs you get are going to be much improved over the UVs that you had before. So, there is definitely still a lot of work to do on the UV toolset in Cinema 4D, but part of the goal is to make it so that you've got a better starting point in a lot of cases.
And as long as we have this this transform gizmo up here, I just want to show that you can also grab the corner, but if you hold down Shift, you can get non-uniform. Hold down Control, you can pivot one point in. You hold down, let's see, well, Alt is pivoting from that point, but if we grab that point again, we can hold down Alt as well, get the opposite corners going. Hold down Control and Shift, or is it Control, Shift, and Alt? Yeah, you can start getting some really funky scaling, but just like transforming stuff in Photoshop, you can really manipulate the exact shape of it if you want to give more emphasis to certain polygons rather than to others.
Right, and there's a number of other little improvements throughout the UV workflow that are here, like better snapping and things like that. But yeah, it's a start.
Yep,
we'll put it that way.
Yeah, UVs. Every once in a while, we get a little hint of some fun UV stuff. Let's see. Someone had a question. Oh, if we tried to render volumetrics on the laptop, we might get some real life volumetric flame.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Any idea when there is a release date that we can?
Early September for release 21. Yeah.
Early September. Let's see. Please exchange thinking particles with X particles. I'm not sure what you mean, Dennis.
Oh, Sam Ura, I hope I pronounced that right, said, cylinder caps are connected in R21, take my money.
As well as a bunch of the other objects, if we jump back to...
and somebody else mentioned here that great comment, Graphos, the new selection components are synced between the viewport and the UV viewport. So when you make a polygonal selection in the UV view, in the 3D viewport and then switch to the UV polygons tool, the correlate selection will be made.
But capsules, oil tanks, everything that had a separate cap is now one model as well.
Right.
So that's definitely applied on a couple of different places. I think the UVs are looking really nice on the new Caps and Bevels on text. Those will completely perfectly translate between them. Let's see. Can somebody get a subscription in advance to the product coming out, or do they have to wait till it comes out?
I would suggest that they contact their local Maxon reseller or sales rep to ask that question. I'm not 100% sure. I think that we can't really sell them until they're available, but ask sales.
Yeah.
Especially if there's a reason to do it now. I'm sure that we can figure something out.
Well, and all that stuff goes to, if somebody bought the MSA, they don't have to worry about getting subscription until their MSA sort of reaches the end of its life, right?
Right. So people can still renew their active MSA until the end of August, and anybody who has an MSA at the beginning of September will get R21 Perpetual. And then also until that MSA runs out, you have the opportunity to convert to subscription. There's some great subscription conversion discounts. Like you get, it's like 20% off of the first 2 years of your subscription.
Yeah. Well, it's just at a certain point, at a certain point, Maxon has to flip the switch where it's like, okay, we're doing subscriptions. And there's people who bought MSAs all throughout the year. So it's like, there's no perfect time to do it. But if you got it, then you can contact and get discounts based on.
We've really done our best to try to accommodate as many cases and scenarios as we possibly can. But, it's always a great idea if you have specific questions about your case. It's hard to deal with those on an online forum or a live stream. Call your local Maxon sales rep and they can look at what you have and how to best get you to where you want to be.
I'm trying to think of other new features. Definitely one that we should spend a moment on is a new curvature inside of volumes.
Yeah, that's really cool, isn't it?
Yeah, I really dig it. I do have an example. Well, let's see if I saved the example. Let's jump over here, jump to my folder. I tried to rename it. Oh, yep, I do. Haha. So, two big new settings that are important inside of the volume builder and mesher. So here, I've already got it in there. Spoiler. Let's go ahead and delete that out. Okay, so that's why it loaded so quick, actually. So I've got this kind of crazy medallion shape. It's just a combination of a bunch of different splines and motext and everything. So right now, if I were to grab this motext and just type in some crazy stuff, click off of it and let it update, you're going to see it's rebuilding the entire hierarchy. Everything here has to be calculated. You can hear the fans going nuts. But now, inside of the volume builder, we can go ahead on any given layer. So I can click on the smooth one. And keep in mind that smoothing layer is the one that really tends to slow down the volume builder. It just has to do so many calculations to smooth every single little polygon that's being generated. So we can go ahead now and click on this cache layer. Go ahead and cache it. And you can once again see we have animation there in case you had something animated. But boom, that just cached that one time. So now with our motext, if I go and update that now, let's just type in R21 again. Select copy, paste, 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 paste. Select copy, paste, 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 paste. And click off of it. Now it doesn't have to do all those calculations underneath, and you can see very quickly it went, and I didn't even hear the fan ramp up that time because it didn't have to do that many calculations. That's that smoothing for you. It'll get you. So that automatically is really cool. But another awesome new feature inside of our volume mesher is, let me scoot this over. In the volume mesher, there's a new checkbox for create curvature map. Go ahead and turn that on, and we're not going to see anything right away, but there's now a vertex map over here. And that vertex map, we can go into our material, and this is the way I showed it off before, is let's just go into our luminance channel. Let's go ahead and create a vertex map. And based on that vertex map, we can drag that in. And hopefully here in the viewport even, we can see that it's generated almost like this perfect shadow map where you could add rust or grime or dirt or worn out edges just based on that being completely generated parametrically. And there's probably a lot of different objects that are going to behave differently, and that should all automatically update as well. If we go back into our builder here, let's just drop this sphere in T for scale. Okay, there it is. Hopefully this doesn't make it explode, but let's go ahead and add this in, and it's a union, so that should be incorporated. I didn't make it a child, so it didn't disappear with it. So that disappears, and then let's see. I'm gonna add in. Let's just add in a nice big tall cylinder as well. So hopefully we can see where these two are combining. And there, yeah, you can now see that we get this curvature map being generated on the corners there. And right now it's concave and convex, but you can do them individually. And I haven't tinkered, but vertex maps are like the new universal translator in cinema. So if you were projecting this off into a different mesh or feeding, I didn't even think about it, but you could probably even generate it on a field. Or
we could generate a field. You could use field forces to pull things into the crevices of of an object, for
Yeah,
instance.
or have things. Yeah, that's super crazy because we could drag this in as a source and get directions from it. So that would be really cool. But yeah, there's I don't know, this caching, and there's also caching in the new node materials as well. You can cache up to a certain point, so you don't have to rebuild that entire hierarchy as well. So yeah, just a huge speed improvement, and these types of settings, especially things generating vertex maps, which have just become, I would have never guessed prior to R20 that vertex maps would suddenly become one of the most important parts of cinema. I remember back when, before there was all the new character rigging stuff, you would rig a character with a series of vertex maps.
Yep.
And it was completely
before
obnoxious.
Waiting.
Yeah, before there was waiting, you had to just use a 0 to 100%, and then drag them into the restriction tag to link them to a particular bone before they're in joints. And so it was insane. And it's like, oh my god, these are the worst. And then you add fields in. It's like, oh, vertex maps are the most amazing thing ever now. So
another new kind of hidden feature is that you can actually control normal maps with fields.
Oh, I completely forgot about that.
It's kind of a tricky one to show because even just creating a normal tag is a little bit crazy with cinema.
I actually even though I had it in my notes, I completely forgot to record that in my main video. Yeah. So do you have
I don't have an example, and I'll probably flub trying. But
I
bet you could do one.
I can definitely do something here. We're going to, let's see, I'm going to make let's make a matrix object. I'm going to tell this to be scaling really tall, so they're vertical. Let's go even further. Let's go 15. And then let's create a target. Okay, this is now targeting. And we're going to tell the target to be based off of a field direction. So it's looking at the fields. So now we can go into our fall off into this field tab. And let's go ahead and we can do something like create a random field. And now it's randomly rotating based on the direction of this random field. But instead of that, let's go ahead and I'm going to hide that for a moment. Let's go ahead and create something like a platonic. Is that how you pronounce that? Platonic? Platonic.
Like a platonic
it's a platonic,
relationship.
a platonic piece of geometry here. It's not too interested in you. So it's a really weird workflow because you have to generate a normal tag?
Yeah.
So I think we have to create a polyfx, put it inside of the platonic, and then turn on preserve Phong. And right now this is the only way to generate it, so that's a little silly. But if we current state the object, you can see now we've got a version of this that has the normal tag. And this normal tag can now be dragged into the field. So let's not use random. Let's look at our matrix again, but let's drag in this normal tag. And instantly you can see some interesting weird things just happen in our viewport. But now essentially based on the direction of the normals of this piece of geometry, it's going to be changing the direction. I'm going to hit T for scale a little bigger so we can see it. R, and now as I rotate this, you can see that the normals are determining the rotational direction of this, which is weird and interesting. But there's a lot more potential applications because this is now in the fields system, which means you could translate these into vertex weights or directions or project one normal onto another. And it gets really weird. This is the only example I've kind of put together, but
right. Well, and also you can actually use fields to manipulate the normals.
Yeah.
So
that starts getting real interesting real quick.
And we'll screw this up royally, but let's just try creating a linear field, and you can see how everything looks flat now because the normals are all going in one direction.
So the Phong is being tricked now into thinking everything's facing the same way.
Yeah. Right. And so, I suppose that there's ways that you can mix multiple fields together to get some interesting effects with the normals. This is another one of those things that I'm really interested to see what people see, how we're getting sort of a different normal effect there. I'm really interested to see what people do with this because, I'm either not smart or not creative enough to quite know the application right off the bat.
Yeah,
but that's one of the great things about Cinema 4D, and we just provide this tool set that we make as flexible as possible, and people just constantly surprise us with the way that they put it into practice.
Yeah, well, when MoGraph came out, there were so many possibilities. It took a really long time, I think, in general, for us to kind of find the edges of like the things that were possible, and we're still finding new things all the time. But then in R20, with the addition of fields, and now with the addition of stuff like this normal, and with the addition of all the new vector stuff, it's going to take a really long time until people find the limitations of what can be done. Because when I was sitting down with people who were showing off some of the vectors, we were like, just while sitting there thinking of like 5, 6 different ways of getting the same result, but there'd be different reasons to build one way versus another.
Right.
And those combinations, like I haven't even begun tinkering with that, but we could take the normals from this and feed it into the vector force and then get everything projecting off of the shape that way, which is, there's just so many combinations. We've barely tinkered. We could have spent all 2 hours here easily just playing with vectors.
Yeah.
Like, it's so deep. It's so endless.
One of my colleagues on chat is actually saying that one great use for the normals is to generate a spherical normal for a plane and then put a tree far in the background, so you get sort of a shaded direction. I mean, the tree doesn't look just flat.
Huh. So, because there's a lot of things where like you put a displacer and the displacer is looking, or you put like a constraint tag and you can say, look at the normal.
Right.
But if you're using the normal tag, then presumably that's the new normal, and a flat plane could take on the properties of the top of a sphere. And so it's on a plane, but it could tilt out based on the normals. And there's probably other ways to do that, but now that's a new combination that can get really specific. And I remember seeing a couple visuals where people were projecting the normals of a text object onto the front of a sphere, and then the sphere is now showing the text in this really weird, interesting way. I think the combinations
There's interesting
are nuts.
possibilities. One question in chat was about the whether there was going to be a student monthly subscription. Maxon actually already offers free student versions to students in animation programs, and we're going to continue to do that. So there's going to be more details about how that all gets implemented in R21 a little bit after the actual commercial release, because student versions typically trail a little bit the commercial release. It takes us a little bit of extra time to get the system lined out for them. But look for some information on that probably in October, November at the latest.
Awesome. All right, we're getting the home stretch here, so if anybody has any questions, hit us now.
Yeah, I actually need
to
wrap up and jump out and get back to the booth. I've got a meeting in 10, 15 minutes.
Oh, okay,
so.
yeah. So
You're welcome to keep streaming.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I was going to wrap this up in about 10 minutes anyway. So, let's see. Chan, do people in this industry even go to school anymore? I think a decent number of people do. There's lots of different forms of education these days. But, and my thought's always been, even when never mind, I'm not going to go that train of thought, but like, just jumping in the software and learning it. What's great is like if you have like whatever the student version is, or the demo version, or a subscription, or a perpetual, it's all exactly the same cinema. You download the demo, you've got the full final version ready to rock.
And by the same token, if you have the student version and you graduate, you just subscribe to the commercial edition. You don't need to download or install a new Cinema 4D. You just switch your entitlement to the commercial entitlement. So
this might not be something that can be answered right now, or maybe you don't even know, but this is going way in the future, so feel free to say we can't do it. But when, let's just say, another version comes out a year from now, would the current version of Cinema update into that new version, or would it be a new install?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I think it'll actually be a new install, partly because we are still offering perpetual licenses, and so we either have to update the online updater to show the right updates based on what you have, or I think it's something that we might be able to do down the road, but probably initially it's going to be a new install still.
Okay.
And I think a lot of people prefer that anyway, because they still like to be able, like for instance, when 22 comes out, they'd still like to be able to go back to 21, for compatibility purposes and things like that.
Yeah, I guess, there's some reason.
We'll probably at the full major version updates still do a full new install. One other question that came in, Jeff had some questions about the discounts that we're offering to current MSA users and how they can convert to subscription. And there's some, like, again, I mentioned earlier, I think on the stream, that there's some great options available on that. I don't really want to dig in too deep into the details here, but again, that's one of those things where your best bet is to contact your Maxon sales rep, because they can look at your specific situation and how the changes affect you.
Yeah, and then just to throw it out there, like, yeah, it's going to be individual cases. Everybody's got their own use. Or somebody has a studio, they bought 20 perpetual licenses. Like, what does that mean for going? But, like, you contact Maxon, and it seems like just the overriding goal here is to make everybody happy, and that nobody should be being punished because they recently spent some money at Maxon. Like, if you bought the software, then there's a lot of effort going into making sure that you can switch over seamlessly and not be punished for having purchased at a particular point.
Yeah, and we try to get in a little bit more detail in the FAQ, but still, again, everybody's situation is just a little bit different.
Yeah.
And so, and there's obviously questions we haven't, and there's even calling your sales team, there may be some questions they can't answer yet because we haven't answered them yet.
Yeah. I can't remember what it was, but there was that one question where it's like, what are we going to do in that situation? We didn't even think about it.
We really tried to anticipate, but it's a big change for us in the way that we do business and everything. We're super excited about it, but we've pulled together quite a system in a very short amount of time, and there's still details to work out, obviously. Exactly. So definitely appreciate the patience everybody has with us as we clarify policies and get everything dialed in.
Yeah. But okay, looks like we've wrapped up questions from Twitch specifically.
Yeah, I think YouTube's pretty much sorted out.
Somebody's asking if you could get curvature without the volume builder. I don't think so. There's not curvature naturally in other places, but you could pretty easily throw your object into the volume builder, get a mesh from there, possibly not even a very dense mesh, and then feed that vertex map into the vertex map of the original object and transfer it so you get the same fall offs from there. So you would have to put it into the volume builder, but you can then transfer it easily.
I think
they're completely unrelated mesh.
I wouldn't be surprised too if there aren't some techniques, because you can feed a vertex map from fields. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some techniques to actually drive a vertex map using fields to generate a curvature map.
Yeah.
By putting the object back into the field. Off the top of my head, I couldn't show you how to do it, but there may be an option there. But like you say, just drop it in a volume object and feed it out from there.
Yep. Pretty little poly. That's a question about the future. Inclusion. It looks like that wraps this up. Any final YouTube ones?
Nope.
All right, awesome. Well, I'm happy that after that one hiccup in the beginning, the stream seems to have worked pretty well.
Seems to.
Pretty good for a hotel.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, everybody, for coming and hanging out. I'm really excited that Rick was the first guest ever on Rocket Lasso. Yeah. So that's really cool.
It was great to be here, Chris. It was fun to have you show some of the great new R21 features to me.
You were giving me a bunch of pointers and helped me get the version so I could actually start learning it. So I had to learn all of this in like the 3 days before the announcement and get it out. But that's some of my favorite stuff.
Yeah.
It really is sort of a Christmas in July.
We all work better under pressure, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's just fun and exciting to sit down. So it's just funny because we're having a discussion about me being on the beta, and I've always had this struggle where it's like, do I want to be in the beta and see the features as they're coming out, or be really surprised right at the very end, kind of along with everybody else, and be like, whoa, look at all this crazy stuff. So it's always a tough call because I've been enjoying getting the announcement every year for like 18 years now or something. So that's really fun. But yeah, we're gonna wrap this up. So thanks everybody for coming in. As I said, we're going to be wrapping up the season of Rocket Lasso pretty soon because I've got a lot of other things I need to be planning, but there'll be a new season coming up again after that. If you enjoy this sort of content, jump on over to the Rocket Lasso Patreon account. If you're on Twitch, you can go below and you'll see a link, and that just helps me do more live streams, be able to pull this kind of stuff off. The idea of a week ago being like, screw it, I'm going to SIGGRAPH anyway, and jumping on a plane and heading out. It enables this kind of stuff and talking to you, talking to everybody else, the developers, and figuring out how the software is working. So that's all really cool. I really appreciate the support. I appreciate everybody watching. I'll see you online. Make sure you check out the R21 video I put out yesterday, kind of covering a bunch of these features. But that should wrap this up.
And please, once we're done here, tune over to c4dlive.com and watch the great presentations happening.
Yes, exactly. For the rest of today and tomorrow, there's a bunch of presentations happening, and they've all been really great so far. So head on over right there, and the conversation can continue.
Yep, absolutely.
All right.
Thanks everybody.
Bye-bye.